You want to know what your city council is up to. I get it. It's tough keeping up with those meetings. They're like the world's longest scroll-down text thread. So we're diving into the Austin City Council minutes from May 2nd and 16th, 2024 to bring you the highlights you actually care about.
And you might be surprised by what bubbles to the surface. These meetings are where we see the clash between the Austin ideal and the nitty-gritty of growth.
Yeah, starting with May 2nd, we're talking sludge tanks and data protection software in the same breath. Seems random, right? But that's city government for you. They approved $141,384 for those tank parts, by the way.
It's a microcosm, isn't it? You've got the essential services like wastewater treatment, not glamorous, but vital, happening alongside the increasingly important need to protect city data. And they actually approved a bit more for the software, $171,000, reflecting that shift towards digital security.
Then, something caught my eye that makes you think about the human cost of city living. A $450,000 contract for critical incident stress management services. That's for our first responders, right?
Exactly. It's for police, firefighters, even 911 dispatchers, anyone who deals with high-stress situations regularly. And that 5-year contract signals a growing awareness of mental health needs, which is encouraging.
Okay, so we've gone from sludge to software to stress management, talk about a range. But there's a thread running through these seemingly random items. Growth, more people, more data, more strain on the city and the people who keep it running.
And that leads us perfectly to the elephant in the room, or at least the topic they postponed on May 2nd, affordable housing. We'll get into the nitty-gritty with the May 16th meeting, but just the fact that item 49, dealing with density bonus programs, got pushed to a later date shows how much debate surrounds this issue.
Speaking of debate, the May 2nd meeting also touched on land use, always a hot topic in a booming city. They approved buying a tiny sliver of land, just 434 square feet, from a trust, and then authorized using some parkland for a transportation project.
It's that constant push and pull, isn't it? Every square foot in Austin seems precious these days. Do we prioritize development or green space? It's something residents are increasingly vocal about.
And it's not just about physical well-being, but also public health. The council greenlit increased funding for HIV-related services. It's not a headline-grabbing issue, but essential nonetheless.
Right, and while the minutes don't specify the amount of the increase, it suggests a continued commitment to fighting HIV, which has a long history in Austin's activist community. So we're seeing those values reflected in the budget.
Now brace yourselves, because we're about to wade into the zoning jungle. Item 88, for example, dealt with a property on Willow Creek Drive. Owners wanted to rezone it for mixed use, meaning shops and apartments instead of just houses, and they were aiming to go higher using a density bonus.
And this is where things get really interesting because it pits those Austin ideal values often associated with preserving the Keep Austin Weird vibe of smaller, neighborhood-centric spaces against the pressures of a rapidly growing city.
Right. More housing often means more density, taller buildings, which some residents feel erodes that old Austin charm. And this particular case on Willow Creek likely sparked some lively discussion, even if the minutes don't capture all the drama.
Exactly. We're just seeing the tip of the iceberg with these zoning cases. But they're a potent symbol of the larger forces at play.
To wrap up the May 2nd highlights, the council went into executive session, those closed-door meetings. This time, it was about legal stuff, including police personnel files. So we're left to wonder what juicy secrets are hidden in those minutes.
And that air of mystery is intentional. Executive sessions allow for sensitive discussions to happen away from public scrutiny, but it also highlights the need for transparency and accountability, which I'm sure we'll see debated as well.
Okay, so May 16th, buckle up, because things are about to get really wonky. But trust me, this stuff matters. We're talking about the future of housing in Austin.
And the city is trying to walk a tightrope, balancing the need for more housing with protecting the people who already live here. That's where this amendment to City Code Section 41832 comes in.
Right. This is all about protecting existing affordable housing when developers come knocking with plans to revamp older apartment buildings.
And it's not just vague promises. The amendment gets into the nitty-gritty. Current tenants have to be given a heads up about the proposed development. Relocation benefits equal to 4 months of rent and fees, plus moving expenses.
Wow, 4 months rent. That's significant. Sounds like they're trying to make sure long-term residents aren't just pushed out.
Exactly, and they also have the option to lease a comparable unit in the new development for at least a year. at a similar rent. So it's not just about throwing money at the problem, but offering a pathway to stay in their neighborhood.
Okay, so far so good, right?
Huh.
But then I stumbled upon this other section, 41833, which allows for waivers to these replacement requirements. Wait, what?
Yeah, this is where the rubber meets the road, or maybe the bulldozer meets the bungalow, in true Austin fashion. See, the council can decide it's not in the public interest to require all those affordable units, or that it's just not feasible for the developer.
So it's like a loophole. And I bet developers love it, but what about folks who need affordable housing?
It's definitely a balancing act, and one that's hotly debated. On one hand, the city desperately needs more housing at all price points. On the other hand, if every redevelopment project gets a waiver, are we really protecting affordability or just paving the way for more luxury condos?
All right, let's talk about another tool in the city's affordable housing toolkit, density bonuses. I'll admit, I always found this concept kind of confusing.
It's basically a trade-off. Developers get to build taller, denser buildings than zoning usually allows if they include a certain percentage of affordable units. Think of it as a carrot-and-stick approach to incentivize affordability.
Okay, that makes sense. But how much density are we talking? The minutes mention specific numbers, something about 90 feet and 120 feet.
Right, so to build up to 90 feet, a developer needs to make at least 10% of the units affordable for households earning 50% or less of the median family income in Austin. And for context, that median income is currently around $110,000 for a family of four.
Wow, $110,000. That's higher than I realized. But it still highlights the affordability crunch here. So 10% for 90 feet, and if they want to go even higher to 120 feet, that percentage bumps up to 12%.
Exactly. And to really make these numbers meaningful, imagine a hypothetical 100-unit building. At 90 feet with the 10% requirement, that's 10 units designated affordable. At 120 feet, it becomes 12 units. So every little bit counts.
It's a fascinating puzzle, figuring out the right incentives to encourage both development and affordability. And it's not just about the number of units, right? The minutes also mention something called transit-supportive infrastructure.
Ah, yes, another piece of the puzzle. This one's about giving developers a different option. Instead of building affordable units directly, they can contribute to things like better sidewalks, bike lanes, bus stops, anything that makes it easier to get around without a car.
So it's like a trade-off. Less direct affordable housing, but potentially creating a more affordable lifestyle by making it easier and cheaper to get around.
Exactly. It's all part of a larger strategy to make Austin more walkable, bikeable, and transit-friendly, which in theory should benefit everyone, especially those who rely on public transit or can't afford a car.
Okay, one last piece of this dense housing puzzle before we move on. I saw something about triggering properties, and honestly, it sounds a bit ominous. What's that all about?
Don't worry, it's not as dramatic as it sounds. This is about protecting existing, smaller homes, often single-family houses, when new development, especially those taller buildings we were just discussing, pops up nearby.
So it's about compatibility, making sure a new apartment building doesn't completely overshadow the houses that have been there for years.
Exactly. Think of it like good neighbor etiquette, but for urban planning. The city has rules about setbacks, how far back a building has to be from the property line, screening requirements to minimize visual impact, noise limits during construction, all those little details that impact quality of life.
It makes sense, trying to find that balance between encouraging growth and preserving the character of Austin's unique neighborhoods. But I imagine it leads to some heated debates.
Oh, absolutely. Especially in older, more established neighborhoods where residents might be worried about a new development changing the feel of their community. It's a classic tale of two Austins colliding.
And speaking of clashing perspectives, let's talk about short-term rentals, or STRs, as the cool kids call them. They're like that friend who's fun for a weekend visit, but maybe not someone you want as a permanent roommate, right?
That's a perfect analogy. The City Council minutes from May 16th dove headfirst into this debate, with a focus on how short-term rentals affect Austin's housing market.
Yeah, because on one hand, you've got homeowners who love the extra income and flexibility of renting out a room or their whole house on platforms like Airbnb. It can be a lifeline, especially with rising property taxes.
Right, and then you have to factor in tourism, which is a huge part of Austin's economy. Short-term rentals often provide more unique and affordable options compared to traditional hotels.
And you knew there was a but coming. Those same STRs can exacerbate the housing shortage and drive up prices for everyone else. It's a classic case of supply and demand with potentially unintended consequences.
Exactly, and it's particularly tricky in a city like Austin, which is grappling with both a housing affordability crisis and a desire to maintain its quirky, independent spirit. Too many STRs, and some fear we become everywhere USA instead of the one-of-a-kind city we know and love.
So what did the city council decide to do about this STR conundrum? Did they try to find that elusive middle ground?
They did. They ended up approving some amendments to the Land Development Code that put certain restrictions on short-term rentals, particularly in residential areas. It's an attempt to strike that balance you mentioned, allowing STRs to exist while mitigating their potential downsides.
It'll be interesting to see how those regulations play out in the real world. But it sounds like they're at least acknowledging the concerns of long-term residents who worry about their neighborhoods turning into tourist zones.
Right. It's about finding ways to make Austin work for everyone, not just visitors or short-term guests, but the people who call this city home year-round. And that brings us to another crucial aspect of the May 16th meeting: funding for affordable housing.
Ah, yes. The city council is not just about rules and regulations. They also control the purse strings. And when it comes to affordable housing, those purse strings need to be loosened. Right.
Tell me about it. Luckily, the city council seems to be on the same page, at least judging by the May 16th minutes. They discussed the implementation of the 2022 Affordable Housing Bond, that $350 million behemoth that Austin voters overwhelmingly approved.
Oh, yeah, that was a big deal. It felt like a real turning point, a recognition that we need to invest serious resources into creating housing options for folks who are getting priced out of the city they helped build.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just talk. The minutes detailed how those bond dollars are being used for things like acquiring land for affordable housing development, building new units, and preserving existing affordable housing.
So they're attacking the problem from multiple angles, which is encouraging to see. But it's not just about bricks and mortar, right? There's also the human cost of displacement, people being forced to move from their homes and communities because they can no longer afford to live there.
Exactly. And that's where Project Connect comes in. Remember, it's not just about building a fancy new train. It also includes a significant chunk of change, $300 million to be exact, dedicated to anti-displacement measures.
Right, because you can't talk about transportation without talking about housing, especially in a city as sprawling as Austin. They're two sides of the same coin, or maybe two stops on the same rail line.
I like that. And the Project Connect anti-displacement funds are being used for things like financial assistance to help longtime residents stay in their homes, legal aid for tenants facing eviction, and community development programs to strengthen neighborhoods facing gentrification pressures.
Wow, it sounds like they're really trying to address this issue holistically, recognizing that affordable housing isn't just about building more units, but about supporting people and communities.
Exactly. It's about creating a more equitable and inclusive Austin, where everyone has a chance to thrive regardless of their income level or zip code.
It's a tall order, but based on these meeting minutes, it seems like the city council is at least moving in the right direction. They're asking the right questions, having those tough conversations, and most importantly, putting their money where their mouth is.
And that's what gives me hope. It's easy to get bogged down in the weeds of policy debates or feel overwhelmed by the scale of the challenges, but seeing those concrete actions, those investments in affordable housing and anti-displacement efforts, it reminds me that change is possible.
So true. It's a reminder that we, the citizens of Austin, have a role to play too. We can't just sit back and expect the city council to solve everything. We need to stay informed, engaged, and hold them accountable for creating a city that works for everyone.
Absolutely. Attend a meeting, contact your council member, let your voice be heard. The future of Austin depends on all of us working together.
Well said. And on that inspiring note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive into the world of Austin City Council meetings. Hopefully you learned something new, maybe felt a little fired up, and are feeling empowered to make a difference in your community.
And remember, this is just a snapshot, a glimpse into the ongoing work of city government. There's always more to uncover, more to discuss, and more ways to get involved.
So stay curious, stay engaged, and as always, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. So we were talking about how the city council is trying to balance all these different needs when it comes to housing affordability, density, neighborhood character. It's a lot to juggle. Did they address electric vehicle charging at all? It seems like Austin's been lagging behind on that front.
They did. And this is another example of those competing priorities coming into play. On the May 16th agenda was a resolution about electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Seems pretty straightforward, right?
You'd think so. Everyone's going electric these days, or at least thinking about it.
Exactly. But even something as seemingly simple as EV charging gets complicated when you factor in things like grid capacity, construction costs, and equity.
Equity. How does that play into EV charging?
Well, not everyone can afford a brand new Tesla, right?
Yeah.
So the city has to think about how to make sure that EV charging infrastructure is accessible to everyone, not just those who live in affluent neighborhoods or can afford to install a charger in their garage.
That's a great point. It's like we talked about with transit supportive infrastructure. You don't want to create a two-tiered system where only the wealthy benefit from these green initiatives.
Exactly. So the resolution the council discussed was about setting goals and developing strategies to expand EV charging access across the city. It's about making sure that as Austin transitions to a more sustainable transportation future, no one gets left behind.
Okay, that makes sense. It's about more than just plugging in your car. It's about creating a more equitable and sustainable city for everyone.
Exactly. And it's another reminder that these city council meetings, as dry as they may seem sometimes, are really about shaping the future of Austin. The decisions they make today will have a ripple effect for years to come.
And that's why it's so important for us, the citizens of Austin, to stay informed and engaged. We can't just leave it up to the city council to figure it all out. We have a voice, and we need to use it.
I completely agree. Read the minutes, attend a meeting, contact your council member, let them know what matters to you.
Well said. And on that note of civic engagement, we're going to wrap up this deep dive into the world of Austin City Council meetings.
Hopefully you learned something new, maybe felt a little inspired to get involved.
As always, thanks for joining us on this journey into the heart of local government.